Good evening, everyone. Dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all tonight on this special occasion. We're here to celebrate an important anniversary, not perhaps important by the date, but important because it's always good for an institution to remember where it comes from. And in our case, we are here to celebrate here the foundation of what was then called the Bologna Center of SAIS Johns Hopkins, today SAIS Europe. And the date is interesting in more than one respect. Actually, this is not today's date. The actual anniversary would be on the 22nd of February, which corresponds to an important date I've discovered today in the history of Johns Hopkins, because Johns Hopkins itself was founded on the 21st of February, 1876. So there's a great continuity uniting the little Bologna Center to its, let's say, parent institution in the US. The 22nd of February, 1955 was the day of the big ceremony that was organized in order to celebrate what was actually a modest, very modest launching of SAIS Europe, since it involved only a small number of people, 4 faculty members, 10 students, little more. And today's SAIS has grown, and of course our common hope is to see it further develop and gain in strength. It remains nonetheless a small institution compared to many other centers of excellence in Europe. We have decided to celebrate this event by hosting tonight's lecture in the tradition of earlier lectures delivered to celebrate this anniversary. And today we have the great pleasure and privilege we will have the pleasure and privilege of listening to a well-known scholar, Professor TITO BOERI from Bocconi University. Professor BOERI is not only a renowned academic, engaged in currently head of the economics department at Bocconi University, a leading university in Europe and indeed in the world. He's also well known for being a scholar who's not afraid of, let's say, confronting his own views with that of, dare I say, the real world. It's not quite nice for scholars because it seems to imply that they are locked in a world that is not quite real. But the fact is that he has held important positions, the most prominent ones being probably his directorship of INPS, the Italian institution in charge of the Italian pension system, which is certainly no holiday, no sabbatical. And he's also well known for being the inventor of a number of very important communication devices. You may have come across the web site he founded a number of years ago, La Voce, which is a very interesting attempt at providing for a dialogue between the world of academia on the one hand and the rest of the world, let me put it that way. He's also the founder and still the director of the well-known Festival dell'Economia, which is currently hosted in Turin, if I'm not mistaken. In other words, somebody who seems to appreciate to engage with society at large, as I think is the role of academics in general. And in that respect, it is a great privilege for us to have him tonight. The theme he has chosen to address is indeed an important theme. It's important, obviously, for Italy, because Italy has to find, well, how to make good use of rather, let's say, sudden and monumental avalanche of European money. An area in which its past record is, let's say, not entirely encouraging. The point I wish to make is that this big gamble is not merely a big gamble for Italy, it's also a big gamble for Europe, partly because Italy is, as everybody knows, a large member country, too large to fail, as one says in other settings. But also because the ability of Italy to spend, and to spend wisely, the funds that have been earmarked by the EU will certainly have an impact on the rest of the EU's ability to repeat the same kind of operation in the future. And those of you who are familiar with European macroeconomic policies and politics know that, well, it was not an easy journey for Europe to reach the stage where it could contemplate the kind of big investment plan that is now known as Next Generation EU. So I won't say that all eyes are set on Italy, but there is certainly a lot of attention to what is happening and will happen in Italy. And for all these reasons, it's really a real privilege for us to hear what Professor Boeri has to say on what awaits Italy and what awaits us. So I'm asking you to join me in a large round of applause for our host tonight.
So thank you so much for inviting me, Renaud, and for your nice words. It's a really great pleasure for me to be here, and also very nice to meet old friends of mine. And I feel honored to be part of this important celebration for you. I don't know how many of you were living in Italy at the time of the great abundance. I wouldn't say it was the time of a land of milk and honey, because we were just coming out of a pandemic, but certainly the general feeling among the public opinion at large, and also many economists and people working very close to policy making, was that we were finally in a condition of a relatively soft budget constraint. So let me take the freedom of bringing you back to those days by just showing to you the titles of some Italian newspapers that were celebrating all the money that was flowing, the great avalanche, as you called, that was coming to Italy in terms of money. You see, tutti i soldi di Draghi, all of the money of Draghi. Draghi, we will have more resources and we will get them sooner. This Conte, this was the government Conte 2, bringing back this check of 209 billion euros. And then this title, that I think is something that is a challenge to economic thinking in general. No? The statement that this is the year in which we give the money is not the time to take the money. So which is a bit strange being said by an economist, because one of the first things that you study in economics is that there is not such a thing like a free lunch. So everything is costly. So there are always clearly constraints to be taken into account. But that was, the condition at that time. This was a time in which everything seemed to be possible. And finally, a lot of things that had been postponed for several years were possible. And there was money, resources to do all of this. 3 years down the road, we have a completely different narrative. If you look at the titles of the newspapers, close to the preparation of Italian budget law, 2024. As you can see, Giorgetti, the Minister of Economy, is saying this year we are going to make very strong cuts to public spending. Mini manovra, which means very tiny budget law, something that is clearly going to give very little to people. A poor manovra, another title. Salvini is looking for money, and Meloni is saying there is no money around any longer. So, something happened. Within just 3 years, the situation changed. Not good. So I'm sorry for those. When did this happen? Should I go back now? Perhaps. I think it's not needed. Okay, so it was just comparing the situation in 2020 towards the end of 2020, beginning of 2021 with the current situation, and the fact that we were down to earth in terms of budget constraints facing Italy. So during the electoral campaign of 2022, many statements, we are going to abolish the Fornero reform. Actually, what this government did to the pension was actually to tighten up the reform even more. There was another promise done during the electoral campaign, was to carry out a major tax reform. And actually there was just a very tiny change, and only for 1 year, which really is not particularly meaningful. If you have to change the tax system, you can't change it for just 1 year. It's really something that is clearly something that is bound to fail in all purpose that is deemed to reach. There were major cuts to the social assistance schemes that were present in Italy. And this is something to be also concerned about, in my view. Is about a cut, is not halving, but almost halving of spending for the poor in Italy, a safety net that had been created in the last 5 years, and it's been largely dismantled by the government. But it's also another indication of the fact that there was really search for money around, and to get looking desperately for funding. Nothing on maintenance of spending related to our plan, to the recovery and resilience plan, because this is one of the problems of the plan, the fact that this is a lump sum, and then some of the investment that you make are going to need yearly spending on maintenance, and the fact that no provision is being made for this is something that will clearly reduce the incentive or local administration to carry out this investment. So nothing was done in this budget law to think about that and to make all of this possible. And then there were also these unspecified cuts to ministers' budget. So a budget law which clearly suggests that Italy has no money right now to spend. How was possible all of this complete change of the climate, of the situation, that of the public debate in Italy, from the great abundance to the great shortage and the lack of money? I think there are a variety of reasons for this to have been happening. First of all, I think we have to go back to the times of the Next Generation EU and the position of Italy with respect to Next Generation EU. Certainly there was I would call it greed of the Italian government, the Conte II, but was also telling that all of this money was flowing to Italy, given all the negotiations that the government had been done in Europe, and the fact that they were able to obtain this large concession by our partner in Europe, which was clearly something which is completely fake, is not true. The reason why Italy got potentially access to all of this money was simply related to the economic situation of Italy. There were clear rules for the allocation of the Next Generation EU, which were based on the economic condition of the different countries. Something not to be particularly proud of, because clearly Italy was getting more, simply because Italy was in a worse shape than many other countries. What is a bit surprising now that we think back to those times is that the Commission didn't put any brake to the greed of the Italian government. There were Conte II government going to Brussels and asking for as much money as possible. Borrowing money is not simply that there were grants, certainly, but most of the funds were in terms of loans. And true, at that time, the interest rate were particularly low, but loans has to be repaid at some stage. And Italy is a country with, as you all know, a very large public debt. So I would have expected the Commission, that had been in the past extremely cautious in looking at the Italian budget situation and repeatedly warning the government about the need to contain and to reduce the debt, not to say anything when a government comes and without having any clear plan on how to spend the money and ask for all of this money all of a sudden. There was actually also no need to get all of this money immediately, because we had time until August 2023 to decide whether or not to take the loan component. Clearly, all countries took the grant component. It would have been silly not to do that. But the loan component was a difficult choice, for the reason I was stating before. So, clearly, it was clear from the very beginning that the position was one of getting as much money as possible and then thinking afterwards of what to do with this money, which is not really the best way, I think, to approach an issue, a decision of this type. When a family decide whether or not to borrow money, first of all, clearly has to think clearly about what is needed, then looking for own resources. And when you see that you can't make it only with your own resources, then you go and get the loan. Italy did something different. It took as much money as possible and then start thinking about what to do with all of this money. If you remember this summit, Villa Borghese, where actors, any people in the art and culture called to say what we could do with all of this money, which doesn't seem to me to be, the idea of a serious plan being made. Also, all of this money had clearly also a very short time horizon. So we had a lot of money to be spent in a very short amount of time. And you may say, well, but Italy is certainly, in Italy, we are champions in spending. We have been, building up this debt. So that means that we are good in spending public money. But this is not the same thing as spending in transfers. Certainly, spending in transfer is easy. You just write a line on a law, and then you have some public administration, typically is Italian Social Security, the place where I've been working for a while, to disburse the money. But in this case, was largely investment money, public investment. And public investment is subject to a number of very strict procedures. Fortunately, it is like that. I'm not saying that these procedures are not, do not play an important role, but to organize all of the spending, this very large amount is a challenge for very efficient administration, way more efficient than Italy. I mean, I don't think that any public administration can spend all of this amount of money. If you take the entire envelope, we go well beyond 200 billion. We go to about 240 billion euros. So it's very large. Also, in part because of the constraints imposed by Brussels, in part also because of wrong choices of the government at the time, the priorities that were defined for the plan were relatively far from the political agenda. I will show you that the electoral campaign in 2022 was talking about things that had nothing to do with the RPP, was something orthogonal to a large extent, as if what was written in that plan was something that was not relevant. And yet to have a plan for the legislature that had nothing to do with the RPP. And also there was this misleading narrative about the soft budget constraint that clearly didn't create the right environment to build up institutions and administration able to govern the process. Finally, there was this decision to extend the duration of this super bonus in construction sector, which is a unique feature, I think, of the measure I've never seen in the planet, something like that. The idea that you compensate, you give more money to people if they do any renovation of their house or building. You not only repay this cost, but you also give more money to people. This is a clear recipe for a gross wastage of money. Nothing like that exists anywhere else in the world. And given the money of the RPP, it was decided to prolong the duration of this thing. That has been something that has absorbed a lot of resources. So all of these things, I think, could explain why this landscape changed completely in just 3 years' time. I just want to give you just the numbers of the RPP. The Italian RPP is the biggest in Europe. That's not relatively to GDP, but in terms of the absolute values. And here we have only the part which is only a part of a plan, because then there are other components that have been ended over time. So we are now at about 240 billion, as I was saying before, so huge. And only 1/3 of all of this is represented by grants. All the rest is loans, so something that will have to be repaid. Other countries are relatively large, but not as sizable as the Italian plan. So it's really a huge plan. This is something about the electoral platform for 2022, political elections in Italy. One would have expected that given this commitment that Italy and this plan that had been subscribing, that party would have been addressing all the things that had to be done in the following 5 years to implement the plan. While the winning coalition, the center-right, in the program, in the electoral program, that was worth even some. It's not easy to really do estimates of the cost of this, but was very, very expensive. So of the order of the upper bound is about 165 billion euros, but was mentioned in the RPP only 2 times. The Democratic Party was doing a bit better in terms of citation and also in terms of the amount of the envelope. The Cinque Stelle, Conte was mentioning the RPP, done under its government only once, and also Azione and Italia Viva the mention were relatively limited. So nobody really was talking about all the challenges and all the obligations Italy had been agreeing to that were part of the plan. And this is simply documenting what the super bonus in construction has been for the Italian budget. These are calculations done in February 2023, is a parliamentary hearing of the Ministry of Economy. Right now, nobody is providing new figures, but I think we are of the order of 125 billion that have been going to this measure that has been benefiting largely rich families. There are also stories about Castle being renewed thanks to this money, because clearly initially was only people having access to capital markets and being able also in paying taxes at a significant level were able to benefit from this tool. So it's been extremely regressive in terms of its impact on the income distribution, and it's really been absorbing a very large amount of resources. And without the RPP, the super bonus would have not been prolonged that long. It clearly predated the RPP, but went on thanks to the RPP. Also, another implication of this super bonus was creating inflation in the construction sector and bringing inflation to the rest of the economy. Prices for construction, all of this intervention, have been increasing by almost 25%, twice, even not 3 times as much as prices for for consumption goods in general. So that has also been increasing the cost of the plan, because quite a significant component of the plan is related to investment projects, and this investment project will clearly be in a way affected by this inflation in the construction sector. A key component of the plan, and that was perhaps also the leading idea. We give all of this money so that you not only will carry out badly needed investment, but also will be able to carry out reforms that have not been done, and that will make it possible to Italy to go back to satisfactory levels of GDP growth. And that was the basis of the gamble. We do borrow money, and given that we will use this money to restore growth and to put Italy back to a potential growth rate that is in line with those of other countries in Europe, we will be able not only to repay the debt, but we will also be able to reduce the debt to GDP ratio. That was the bet that was at the basis of the plan. So to do that, you were supposed to carry out reforms. The reform actually were not particularly costly in terms of money. So the money of the RPP was not used to fund these reforms, because compared to the size of the RPP, the cost of the reform are absolutely negligible. So the link between reforms and the RPP are not clear. And my impression is that in writing the RPP, there was a commitment to do reforms, and to make the plan being accepted in Brussels, you needed to put reforms. But this reform were somewhat written at that time, given the fact that you had to submit this plan relatively in a short amount of time, but written in not sufficiently well thought through way. Let me use this expression, but I could say more perhaps later. So the civil justice reform, this is a badly needed reform in Italy. This would be something very important for doing business in Italy, as well as for transaction, to reduce transaction cost at all levels. One of the key problems in the civil justice is that we have a very large backlog. And the idea here was to hire people to deal with the backlog. These are people just leaving out school, the graduate students getting to work, which was a bit too ambitious. When I was working at Italian Social Security, we also had the backlog of for instance, claims on the disability benefits and this type of thing. So we created a system of subsidiarity. And generally, those cases that are part of a backlog are the most difficult ones. So not something that you can give to a freshman or someone who has just started the profession. But in any event, this failed because we were supposed to hire some 15,000 people. They hired half of them, and then half of those who were hired then left. Before even completing the first year, because they moved to other administration in Italy, and largely because wages were not so competitive, and also it was a fixed term appointment. One of the attractiveness of the public sector is the fact that it gives you permanent jobs. Employment security is perhaps the most interesting feature of a public job, and in this case there was not such a thing, and therefore the selection was not up to the task and to the goals. The labor reform should have improved job matching, something badly needed in Italy, because we have clearly large unemployment in spite of a large stock of unfilled vacancies. There is clearly a regional misallocation of labor, many other things. So it would be good to improve clearly the matching of workers to jobs. But the problem is that to do that, as we all know, because active labor market policies are subject to experiments in all countries in the world, you need an infrastructure to do that. You need a public employment service, or you need to rely on private placement agencies. It's not something that you do just writing a law. And unfortunately, this this concern about infrastructure was not there. There are entire regions, the regions where unemployment is higher in Italy, that do not have a public employment service. So one would have thought that if you want to do a reform of that, you need first to think about creating this infrastructure. And creating this infrastructure means either that you build up from scratch this, or that you have a central administration acting using the subsidiarity principle and intervening in these areas. Nothing like that was done. The money was given to the regions without having the infrastructure in place. And when we said this, because we wrote an article together with Roberto Perotti on Repubblica on this, they said to us, look, if we had not done it, we would have not been able to pass the law by the end of the year. And we were supposed to pass the law by the end of the year. So, that's another clearly indication of the fact that things were done too much in a hurry, and then the result were bad. Competition law, the competition law was supposed to be a yearly thing. And clearly we do have many areas in Italy where more competition is needed. There is this incredible things about the beach resorts that are overly protected. Europe is always sanctioning Italy for not doing anything in this front, but nothing is happening. And the competition law, there is not such a thing like the annual law on competition, unfortunately. Education was extremely important area of reform. The only thing that is in the plan and is actually being done, something, is the digitalization of schools, which I have mixed feelings about it. I'm not against the digital transformation and so on, but I think we have to, in a way, take into account that this cannot be the solution of all problems of the Italian school system, of the education system. We went to visit some compulsory schooling for with children age 5 to 10, and they were using the money received from the plan to buy iPad for all the students. And I do think that our students at those age are overexposed to internet and this type of thing. So I don't think this is an efficient way to spend the money. While there are many other things that are badly needed in the Italian school system, above all, we need to improve the careers of the teachers, to improve the incentive of the teachers, work on and also we badly need to work on preschools, because there is a large literature suggesting that preschools are really what bring us closer as possible to be, to improve, let's say, the quality of opportunity. And give more opportunities to children coming from poor families. And we have a serious gap in Italy for nursery schools. So there are very few children aged 0 to 3 going to these preschools, while instead the kindergartens have a take-up rate which is very high, in line with other countries. So here, effort should have been made to create more nursery school, especially in those areas where there is a clear shortage of those. And it's not a problem of demand by the family, it's clearly a problem of supply of nursery schools. Here the plan was, the RPP acknowledged that need, and actually there was a plan to create a lot of nursery schools. But the problem is, again, due to the fact that things were done in a hurry, what happened is that the municipality that were supposed to get the money and invest in nursery school decided that rather than building up new schools, they had simply to renovate the kindergartens. But as I said, there was no need for doing that, because we were already there at a very high take-up. And the reason why they did that is simply because if you just renovate, just do some small adjustment to an existing school, then there is no future commitment to spending. There is no fact that you take up a financial burden in the future. While if you do instead create from scratch a new school, then you will have to pay for the teachers. You will have to pay for the structure, to maintain the structure. And these are permanent spending, while you are getting only a temporary funding. And so that's why many local authorities decided not to do this. And actually, they didn't do what was so much needed in Italy. Also, there was no change in the teacher recruitment and careers. Now we are going to have a major competition for jobs in the Italian school system, and they will take place with the old rules. No change with respect to the old practice in that respect. The public administration, I've been working in the public administration. Actually, it's Italian Social Security is one of the largest public administration in Italy. And believe me, really, the administration is a problem of people. Who is there is more than anything else. And so, given that there are a lot of the Italian civil servants are relatively aged, one of the let me tell you the story. Now that I'm working in a university, I'm dealing with personnel issues also, because I clearly am dealing with the faculty of the Department of Economics. I have, when we do recruits, typically have the people who come and work at Bocconi to ask me, is there a nursery school? Is there something? Because, I have small kids, I have to. When I was at IMSS, the request was coming to get a nursery school for their grandchildren, not for their children. So that gives you an idea of the aging of the Italian public sector. So a lot of people will retire. So it was a great opportunity to renew completely the staff of the public administration. And that, believe me, is the real reform of Italian public administration. But unfortunately, in that, and so you should have had better recruitment procedure. And improve the quality of the applicants. And unfortunately, in that respect, actually, the bar has been lowered rather than increased. And also, in that respect, the progress has been extremely modest. The bet was based also on unrealistic forecast about the impact of the reform. These are numbers obtained by from the Italian document. So the justice reform was supposed to lead to an increase, a permanent increase of Italian GDP of about 28 million per year. So in net present value, if you look from now to infinity, it would be some 600 billion. And out of an investment of 4 billion. So it's amazing, you know, there is such a thing with such a great return is why we didn't do that before. I mean, 4 billion is nothing. 4 billion is something that we didn't need the RPP to do it. The labor reform, 7 billion per year compared to 4.4 billion spent only once. So, no, so far I don't think we get any benefit in terms of growth from the RPP. We could have certainly had an impact on GDP of this massive spending, the super bonus in construction, because clearly all of this money was spent, so unavoidably had an impact on GDP, but it was an ephemeral event, and clearly it was not as strong as some people are arguing. If you look at value added in construction sector, it's not so much different than the dynamics of value added in other part of the economy. So also the boost that was expected to come from this huge amount of money that was devoted to the super bonus to the construction sector didn't have such an impact on growth. So what's next? I think that the problem is that at this stage, I don't think anybody has a clear idea where we are in terms of implementation of the RPP. And this is also one of the reasons why the government at some point decided to cut funding to local governments, thinking that the local governments had been inactive and not doing anything in this respect, while as a matter of fact, some municipality had already decided who were the winners of the competition, of the bids for the project, and therefore we may have some controversies, judicial controversies related to this. And the reason is that the government didn't know that, because the database that exists at the Ministry of Economy is only something which is tracking actual spending rather than tracking the fact that a decision had been made about subcontracting construction works and other investment projects. So no doubt we are going to have delays, and this is, I think, is something at this stage well known, and everybody is aware of that. The problem is wastage of resources. I wouldn't be that worried about delays. As I said, it was easy to predict that it would have been impossible to spend all of this money in such a short amount of time. My main concern is that we are spending not in the right way this money, and that would be a serious problem. So I prefer that we don't spend and we have delays rather than spending in a poor way. Also because we still are in time, if you want, to reduce the size of a plan. There is no cost associated to that. Well, maybe some reputational cost or political cost, no doubt. I'm not that naive not to deny that. But I think that from the standpoint of the Commission, they already said, if you want to cut down some project, there is no problem. We are not going to lose the grants. Even if this project were supposed to be funded partly by grants and partly by loans, what we are going to lose is only the loan part, while the grant will be kept. So it's not a problem. I think the political cost also will be paid also by the current government, because at the beginning the government was just playing the game of saying this is not our plan. Now that they presented the reform of the plan that actually increased even more the size of the total envelope, now they can't say that, so they clearly cannot deny ownership of the plan. I think it is possible to renegotiate with Europe the timing and scope of a plan, This is possible also because other governments are having difficulties in implementing the plan. The issue is whether to do this with the old or with a new commission coming out of the European election. I think it would be safer to do it right now, perhaps, but that's something we have to see. Clearly, the situation has changed dramatically since the times of the pandemic. The time in which the Next Generation EU project was launched was completely different. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, and there was a widespread awareness of the fact that monetary policy was not sufficient to restore growth in the euro area. And therefore you needed to have some fiscal policy being supported at the European level. Right now, the situation is quite different. The new Stability and Growth Pact I think, is an expression of a new way of thinking that is bringing us back to, say, the times of austerity to a large extent. And certainly the fact that Italy put a veto on the ESM was not something useful in this respect, because clearly created a condition that which the negotiating power of Italy has been weakened, and also the position in Europe of Italy has been largely weakened. So what are the lessons that, in my view, should be drawn from this experience so far, and things that could make it possible to still not lose entirely this opportunity that came with the Next Generation EU project? First of all, we should acknowledge the fact that Next Generation EU is not Eurobond. I mean, although the two things are often confused and mixed up, there are two different things. To be a Eurobond, it should have been a joint and several liability. So the fact that everybody involved at the European level is liable for this debt. This is not the case. With the Next Generation EU, national governments are still liable. Yes, the Commission is also liable to the extent that it has own resources, but we all know that the resources and the budget of the Commission is very tiny. So if we really want to have a European level fiscal policy and a larger budget at the European, and the fact that we have a joint and several liability, we need to have clearly a sufficiently large supranational tax base. Without it, I don't think we are going to make any stable progress in this respect. There are certainly things that is better to do at the European level. Unfortunately, we have to think seriously about defense, given the current circumstances. We'll have to think more about research. We'll have to think more about environment. We'll have to think about migration. All these policies are more efficient to be carried out at the European level, and money is needed to do that. Other things, instead, is better to keep it under the responsibility of national governments. So the RPP was so far a missed opportunity to improve planning and monitoring of public expenditure. I think one of the good things of the RPP was that, finally we get public administration who are forced to plan ahead of time, to think about the next 5 years, and also to be subject to rather strict monitoring at the European level. But the European control is not a substitute for the fact that you get a good monitoring system nationally. And unfortunately, the lesson we're learning is that we didn't invest enough on that. And I know the reasons for this not to be done, whether politicians wish to avoid controls, but it is true that currently we don't have a clear monitoring of the state of implementation of the plan, and the government is postponing continuously reporting on this. The RPP could have been, as I said also before, an opportunity to improve the quality of public administrations, which is not really via digitalization. We are giving too much importance to digital transformation. In this respect, is a matter of people. And I think we should have been working more in making the RPP the opportunity to improve hiring in the public administration. Also because this was the requirements to then be able to implement a plan of this size, of this magnitude. So we should have done more in that respect. Unfortunately, the design of the RPP didn't allow that, because it was a lump sum, And the idea is that you should have funded capital spending rather than current spending. And, I'm not so convinced that this distinction between capital spending is good and current spending is bad. Capital spending is a good debt and current spending is bad debt. I don't think that this view can lead us very far away. Hiring good people in the public administration is current spending, but is an investment in the future to a large extent. Improving the health system, hiring good doctors, as we badly need and was badly needed after the pandemic, is current spending, and yet is something that improves human capital, the quality of life of a lot of people, and by doing that will also reduce further spending in the future, because clearly can be done, a lot of things can be done by preventing things. The cost of also the health system is very much related to the fact that we transform some illnesses in chronic disease, and clearly that is extremely costly to face. So if we can improve the prevention, that would be something very important. Also, there is a need to refocus the plans, and I think the big challenge faced by Italy, but is faced also by many other countries in Europe, is the demographic decline. That's really the big challenge we are facing right now, and requires really a refocusing of policies to take that into account. Italy is losing every year for natural balance some 250,000 people. So a town like Catania is disappearing from the landscape every year. So to cope with that, and clearly losing people is not something that reduces the number of people you should share the pie, or it's not a matter of changing the redistribution. It's a matter of growth, because clearly, especially an aging society reduces the pace of innovation. If you look at the time of the discoveries that yield a Nobel Prize, Nobel Prize laureates are typically elderly people, and but that they are rewarded, as you know, is not an award of a career; it's an award to some discoveries, some works they did at some point in their life. And if you look at the age at which this works, this project were carried out, you see that most of them were done when they were around age 30 or so. So an aging society is something that reduces also the pace of innovation. So you really need to, as much as possible, rejuvenate. And to do that, clearly you need to have legal immigration, and also you have, having more legal migration also means investing in second generation migrants, including social inclusion projects in urban suburbs. Unfortunately, this is something that was initially undersized in the Italian RPP, and was even more reduced by the current government. Sometimes, having also sport facilities, and this is a way to include people and to get, which is extremely important in my view. We need more nursery school. Sometimes in the political statement, you have the story that we don't need more migrants. We need to have more higher fertility rates among natives, as if the two things were one the opposite of the other. I do think that there is a very strong complementarity, because having more migrants reduces the cost of raising children, no doubt, because most of those are those who really can relieve, generally mothers, because the burden of childcare very much is on women. From this task, and be able to go back to work, because there is a qualified personnel to take care of the children. So I do think the two things are absolutely complementary. It's not that you can do one thing without the other. And the advantage of the migrants is clearly that you don't need to wait for 20 years before they start paying social security contribution that are quite needed to fund the pensions, just to mention some of the spending. And we also need structural investment in home care and day care, helping families to deal with non-self-sufficiency and disability among elderly relatives, because not always, unfortunately, aging is also healthy aging, and we have to cope with this fact that there is a higher incidence of all of this. When I say these things to the people who have been writing the RPP, and actually is a quite a strange thing, because typically in public, they clearly defend very strongly the RPP, and they do challenge all of the statements in a very tough way, even sometimes. But in private, they acknowledge the fact that there were a large set of mistakes. But anyhow, one of the objections I make when I state that we should have a refocus of a plan, and this is what really our priority now is dealing with the demographic decline and do all of these things that I was saying before, they tell me, but come on, but the RPP is a plan for growth. We need to grow more in order to repay the debt. And so the bet is based on a growth financing capacity. And what you're saying is more related to well-being, to welfare, to social cohesion, and so on. You know, I don't know really whether this is, I don't claim, I certainly won't ever claim that what I'm proposing will yield these incredible miracles of growth in the years to come. But I do think that promoting social inclusion, allowing children, second generation of migrants to go to school, reducing dropout rate in school is something that in the long term will be extremely beneficial also for the growth of Italian economy. So I think that there is some growth financing effect there as well. And let me conclude with the fact that we are now edging towards the European elections, and I think that many parties, the non-populist parties or the non-radical right parties, are typically afraid of talking about these issues, because talking about migration is deemed to be something that is a recipe for disasters. And so they leave to the right, radical right, the task of talking about migration. And let me show you a diagram that I just produced a couple of days ago. I'm afraid, perhaps the quality of it is not that good, but these are tweets. The coverage by tweets of politicians in Europe of the issue of migration. This is before elections. So these are months counted before some general elections. And you see that there is a line up there, and this line up there is represented by politicians of right-wing parties. So no doubt the issue, and here is tweets devoted to the issue of migration. No doubt migration has been monopolized in the attention of a public opinion by radical right parties. All the other parties are afraid to talk about migration, especially when you get close to the elections. It's no doubt it's an extremely controversial topic. It's one very difficult to talk about, but I think that under the current juncture, it's something that should be addressed, and clearly explaining the hard numbers of the demographic decline, explaining to people how our pension system operates, basically with the fact that it is the current workers to pay the current pensioners, and the fact that if you get less workers, you won't be able to pay pension in the future. And that also the health sector clearly has to be supported by relatively young people working and being subject to way less important spending in health. All of these things, I think, are arguments that could be used. And I'm telling you also this because based on informational experiment that we carried out. We provided this information to people in an experiment that we carried out recently, and it turned out that the attitudes towards migrants changed quite abruptly once people realized that the pension system worked in a different way than they thought. It was simply providing them the information about how this system works. People tend to think often that the pension system works like a bank account. So you put the money and then you get the money when you decide to retire. But if you explain to them this is not the case, and that the pension system works with the current workers paying the pension to the current retirees, and then you explain that you need more workers because otherwise we are bound to have one worker per retiree in a few years' time in Italy. I think they realize that we need more people paying contribution, and this more people paying contribution, at least in the short run, in the next 20 years, can be only migrants. Because even if you recover fertility rates in Italy, it would take some time before these people will be able to pay the contribution. So I think addressing this issue rather than leaving them entirely to the right-wing parties would be something important. And certainly this is a topic for Europe, so a topic for European elections. And I hope that some attention to it will be given. And I think I will stop here because I think I've been taking already too much time of yours.
Well, thank you very much, Tito, for this very broad overview of the situation. Can't be said that you did give us much to cheer about, but we're not here to be reassured. We're here to look at the world as it is, and at the problems it is faced with. And in that respect, indeed, your analysis is quite compelling. We not only what was the plan ill-conceived, but it is not properly implemented, and on top of that, we're not addressing the right issues. So there is quite a lot that can be discussed because, as said earlier, this is an issue that has huge implications for this country, but it also has implications for the whole of Europe. It is indeed important to understand better not only where we are, but in which direction we will be heading in the future. And the fact that sadly, the fact that we are now entering in an electoral campaign is likely to mean that we won't address the real issues, because that's the way it works. And the data you provided in your last slide does not belie that statement. So there's a lot to be discussed. There's not much time, though. we only have time for now, for which reason I will now stop and ask people for their questions, their remarks. I will ask every one of you to be first to introduce his or herself, and then, of course, to be short in your questions and remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm Daria Lange. I'm a first-year Maya student. I have a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask one for the lack of time. So my questions are about the conditions of the loan, and two things. So the Commission seemed to allow for a lot of money, but at the same time just offer, I think, until 2026 for having it spent. What was the economic thinking behind that? And do you think it had any to do with like the unpopularity of austerity measures after the 2008 crisis? Do you think that's connected? Thank you.
So immediately to each question, yes. Well, it was clearly, we were just coming out of the pandemic. We're partly still in the middle of it in some countries. And I think the Commission and many member states acknowledged the fact that monetary policy was not sufficient to restore growth in the euro area. And therefore you needed to have something else. And so that was the idea of this large envelope being given to country. Then, clearly, in the philosophy of spending for these programs, like the structural funds, so you need to give a time duration for this project to be done, and also this was this idea that you had to fund only capital spending, and all of this was a once-for-all funding. So I think that there could have been ways to accommodate this, having a longer time span. So in principle, money is fungible. So if you're given money to spend in public investment, then you can fund also things that it would have done in an event, and then get the resources to spend also in current spending, which is something that was needed, as I was arguing before. But unfortunately, given the fact that we had to do this so quickly, and at the end of the day, I think that was a mistake, and in the future, something like that should not be done, maybe.
Yes, thank you. Anna-Maria.
Thank you very much for the talk. So this sounds as much a failure of Italy as it is a failure of Brussels. So is there this type of self-criticism in Brussels, and how does that affect what you're saying, and how much should we emphasize this point, or does it risk to only blame Brussels? But definitely it's an important point, and I wonder if the way other countries dealt with this money can shed light on this point. I know that they got less money than Italy, but it would be interesting to compare.
No, I fully agree with you. I think it would be very important to know more about what the other countries are doing. Unfortunately, there is not much information about what is happening elsewhere. I know that Portugal, for instance, is in a better shape than other countries. Spain decided only very recently to take some of the loan components. Initially, most of the countries have only gone for the grant component, and the clearly way smaller plan. Italy instead decided to take the entire thing. Now, certainly there are responsibility of Brussels. As I said initially, they should have been warning the Italian government about the fact of taking all of this money. And also they had to invest in monitoring, because they can't follow such a huge plan themselves. They have very strong difficulties so they can, in a way, base their assessment on what the government is reporting, but they have no ways to really. And the role of the Commission is very important, because controls sometimes are important. In many cases, there were ways to, in a way, bypass the controls that were, in a way, after the initiative of the Commission were revealed. So I think that also, if this is the philosophy, then also the monitoring capacity of Brussels should be enhanced.
Thank you. I see several hands raised. I would propose to take
we take
two,
a few,
three, collect a few questions. So Tito, you go first, and then indeed there was a hand raised in the back. Yes.
I sort of agree with all what you said, but the question that I have is sort of a different one. It's clear this could be a loss of opportunity for all the very good motive you have, but I question from a macroeconomic level, what would be the counterfactual of the Italian government not taking the loan? So the question, given the interest rate, a debt to GDP ratio higher than 100%, what is the level of fiscal multiplier you have in mind to saying that it was not a good idea in the terms of long-term debt sustainability and debt to GDP ratio? What would be with and without taking this loan?
Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you, Professor BOERI, for coming out this evening to speak to us. My name is Francesco. I'm in the MEPP program. My question is, if all of the problems that we've discussed tonight were resolved and the public administrations were working perfectly, we had high quality employees coming in and filling, and the school healthcare system, education system, everything improved, we still have a looming problem, which is that of a brain drain. Young, skilled Italians, whether they're skilled or unskilled, want to leave Italy. And I think it's one of the biggest problems that are facing. If you'd address that, would be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael is next. And maybe we stop after Michael for the collection, and then you'll get the floor in the next round.
Michael Lee, I'm teaching European public policy and course on the future of Europe. What I'd like to ask you is whether, in light of this experience, the idea that the recovery program was the EU's Hamiltonian moment, and that we'd finally broken through the inhibition on debt-financed European expenditure, inaugurating a whole new era. I mean, is this a myth? Now, when we see in the area of defense and the intentions of Ursula von der Leyen in the election campaign and beyond, she's giving the impression that the experience gained with the recovery program should now be transposed to the area of defense. Would you issue any words of warning?
So all very good and challenging questions. I'm not sure I will be able to answer, but I just give you my views on them. Fiscal multiplier, certainly not those, but were implied by the forecast and the prediction, but because, from 4.4 billion getting 70 billion, these are clearly fiscal multipliers that are clearly out of any serious estimate of them. Now, what I think we can be said at the present juncture, we don't know yet what is going to be done and what has been done, because there is not a clear idea. But in my view, what you can see and observe in the data is that so far the RPP has had a very modest impact on the growth of Italian economy. The only part was, as I said, that had some effect on GDP was the super bonus. But the super bonus is something that also is going to give us bad also implication and already now we see some of this down side effects of the super bonus. So I don't think the counterfactual in terms of GDP dynamics is very much like what we have been observing. Brain drain is indeed a very important issue, so thank you for raising the issue. I think that one of the reasons why many Italian youngsters have left is clearly the dire state of the market at entry for young people in Italy. And one of the problems also behind this is the fact that for several years, the Italian public administration has not been hiring people. Public jobs are a main source of entering the labor market for young people, have been historically a very important one. And so I think that a good plan to improve hiring in the public administration to bring us, I'm saying that also based on my own experience, because when I was at Teams, we ran a competition to hire people and we launched in universities and we got very good applicants actually. And so I don't know how many of those would have gone perhaps abroad to study but I think public jobs could have been also important and would be badly needed. They have a bad reputation, public jobs, but I think they have really are very important. Hamiltonian, there was a lot of rhetoric, no doubt, and the rhetoric is still with us to a large extent. No, I think that the Next Generation EU was an important step. I'm not denying that at all. That was a very important evolution of thinking at the European level, and certainly the fact of addressing this issue together was extremely important. But as you rightly pointed out, now that we have these difficult choices to be made about defense spending and so on, countries seem to be going there in isolation without having. So what we have to be clear is that what has been done with the Next Generation EU is not to have a Eurobond. I mean, there is this view that Next Generation EU is like a Eurobond, which is, I think, quite misleading. To move in that direction, we would need to increase the tax base at the European level. The web tax was considered as being one of the potential sources, but I doubt it is sufficient to raise enough money to fund the type of spending that should be carried out at the European level. Perhaps harmonizing capital taxation. There are other areas where more has to be done, and then we will be able to talk more about fiscal policies at the European level. Also, we have to decide what should be funded by Europe and what should be done by national government, because sometimes you hear people saying that even, I don't know, the welfare state should be run in Brussels, and I don't think it's a good idea at all.
Yes, the least one can say about recent negotiations over macroeconomic policy issues in Brussels is that the atmosphere was not prone to
absolutely not
a repetition of the same
absolutely
kind of
not.
Now, Putin and Trump may, of course, help us reconsider. These things happen. We will see. Let's resume. Yes, you were next, and then Guido. Please raise your hand so that I can identify.
Yeah, I have two, two small observations. It's a lot of money to be spent in a very short lapse of time. And in Brussels, they don't have great capacity of project supervision. There is not much capacity. And in Italy, the quality of the projects is very modest, because there was never a tradition in the preparation of complete projects, from feasibility to detailed design to construction supervision. So I wonder what mechanisms are in place to supervise and to monitor what will be done. Projects are vastly different from province to province, from region to region. And then there is the procurement law. And procurement law is fairly complex in Italy. Sometimes you have the impression that a mafia guy would have not prepared it better. Yeah, often procurement is arranged depending from where the project. So the problems are massive.
Hello, Tommaso, University of Bologna. Tito, from your presentation, I'm not sure I understood your vision on the restructuring, say, the renegotiation of the plan, because you mentioned this postponing of a mass of projects. From what we can read from the news, what has been postponed so substantially are projects managed by municipalities with a size which is much smaller, 55,000 of projects accumulating to less than 3 billion, a move to cohesion funds with time after the 2026, and focusing on those projects that 3,000 projects accumulating to more than 85 billion. So it seems that the government focused more on a size of the project instead of the topic. Would you agree with this? Would you have done the same? Or it's a difficult question. But...
Guido.
Thank you. I'm Guido. I'm from Argentina, so I have a long experience in things going wrong. And your presentation. Your presentation was very convincing regarding all the mistakes made in the design and implementation of the program. But you didn't give so many details on why. You mentioned many times things like they did it in a hurry, and that's why it didn't work. And I tend to believe sometimes that there are other issues that might have played a role. So I'm curious about your take on that.
All very challenging and very nice questions. Now, I fully agree on the procurement problems. Indeed, the reform of procurement was very important. And the idea of the Draghi government was one of reducing the number of, we call them stazioni appaltanti, so centers that could really do competitive bids and be in charge of this, because there are far too many. To carry out all of this, you need to have very qualified people to be able to interact with private firms, being able to design the bids, and so are all things that are very difficult to do. If you have so many of these centers, then really you are in troubles, and the risk of clearly of a misuse of funds, to say something which is nice. I mean, we could have the worst terms, is very large. So and clearly Brussels in that has not the capacity to follow all of this, especially when you have involved many small projects, as in the case of the RPP. So it's really a reason of concern. And again, one of the reasons why sometimes current spending related to some specific policy may be better than capital spending. So we should not think that capital spending is always good. I think that the Italian government, in the change to the plan done in July 2023, made some things that were good, in that they acknowledge the fact that some of the objectives were not attainable. Some of them were really absolutely out of reach. So good to have acknowledged that. But on the other hand, what they did at the end was to cut those parts of the plan were more important, like all of these local projects that, in my view, were really so important. And as I said before, they seem to have done that without having clearly also an idea of the state of implementation of this project. So I think that at the local level, many things should be done there, and I was talking about some of the things that ought to be done. We clearly have to link the implementation of a project to providing to local authorities funds for maintenance of these activities. Otherwise, they will never carry them out because they are concerned about the burden they put on their budgets by doing these investment plans. And finally, the why. Oh, that's a very difficult one. Clearly, it's a matter of to some extent, thinking about a plan of this relevance that have to be carried out over a certain number of government is a big challenge also for the democratic standpoint to some extent. Who could commit future governments to carry out all of these things is the only possibility would have been to start with a relatively modest plan and then let the government to come to do other parts of the plan, and so that there was a clear idea of what had been so far the scope of a plan that could be debated and discussed, and then the government coming after could have been claiming ownership of another part of a plan. So something like done gradually, in my view, would have been certainly better and would have avoided many of the problems we had. Clearly there are other problems related to the decision making at the European level. The fact that that happened in a condition that was to some extent exceptional, and that we at the European level we don't have I think the mistake of the Commission could have been tougher in examining the initial request of the Italian government, as I said before. And maybe they didn't do that because they thought that given the effort they'd been making in collecting all of this money, then if Italy had not taken a substantial part, it would have been a failure of the fundraising of the project itself. And I think that was not a good idea at all. I mean, I think Italy being very prudent in using the fund is something that instead gives more support in the future for attempts to share fiscal policy or to have to carry out policies at the European level in the future.
Well, I hope that in the future people will not let's say, attribute the lax attitude that you describe to the fact that, well, the commissioner in charge happened to be from Italy, because if that were to be the case, then the future of similar funding schemes would be extremely bleak. But be that as it may, you talked about unattainable objectives. There is one that we all know well, which is that of finishing a lecture on time. It's near impossible, as we well know. And yet, in this case, we have not, let's say, binding constraints, but we have, let's say, severe incentives to stick to the timing, because Professor BOERI has to catch a train in a not too distant future. So I think we will bring this conversation to an end, at least provisionally, because as you could see, Professor BOERI brought to us tonight a number of elements that need being revisited in a not too distant future. Hopefully, this will be an opportunity to notice that his most gloomy forecasts were not necessarily as dramatic as he feared, but let's take this contribution of his tonight as an important warning for all of us interested in public policy in general and European public policy in particular, that this is an experiment that really needs to be researched upon and closely monitored, because it has huge implications and, so it seems, huge problems as well. So thank you very much, Tito, for your contribution tonight.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us.
I should leave this. Sì, devo lasciarvi questo. Grazie.
Piccolo
grazie. Grazie mille.